So understanding your business drivers is really important, and think about cyclical events. Workarounds. So I mentioned that, I can work from home, so I have a laptop, I bring it with me. It's basically a mobile office. I have very little paper, so as long as the internet's up and my computer's up, I'm good, right? There are other things that may not be as easy. So one of the things we say is understanding your business. Rank your business, and I use like an ABC priority, right? A is your critical stuff. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen, forget it. B is the stuff is, yeah, it's valuable and it makes you money, but it's not as critical. So either it's less priority, or your customer base. If you're doing something for Walmart, they're typically always an A category item, right? You're dealing with a mom and pop, and they're going through a wholesaler distributor. Maybe you have a little bit more luxury. You can put that aside. Then the C items are those nice to have. Maybe we were going to do employee training, but we can put that off. Maybe we were planning to do a validation batch or recertification. We might be able to delay that. So really understand your work. So define your work that you need to make sure that happens. And try and use that 3-bucket ABC category. A is critical stuff. That's where everybody should know what my A items are, my priority markets, my priority products. This is the stuff that has to happen. And in that order, those are the business priorities. B is the stuff that, yeah, it's important, it's valuable, but not as critical. And C is the stuff that you can either stop doing, like we're not gonna do this, we're gonna cancel that training event, or outsource it. You can send it to somebody else. So if you know that you can do it, it's not your critical process, and you can outsource it either to a sister plant or another company, and you can buy it. Maybe you spend a little bit more money, but it may be worth it for you to recover faster. So those are those C areas. Okay? But understanding your workarounds to be able to offload, prioritize, really make sure that you know. We have some plants that shut down at shift change, and one of the things we talk about here is how do you increase capacity? Well, you want to get more out of your equipment, so you may need extra staffing. So how can you bring your labor into your facility so that you run nonstop and you never shut the machine down? So normal operations, you may not have that extra staffing, but in business continuity, you want to think, how can I do that? So how can I offload work, or how can I bring more work, more resources in to do more work, or do work faster? So that's what you're trying to think about in this process. Okay. Suppliers. Probably everybody in every industry is worried with suppliers now. The more we globalize, the more we've outsourced, suppliers has become probably the most profitable part of the business if you're in selling software, is how to manage your suppliers. This is a really big area now. So everybody uses supplies are coming from all over the world, and with all the lean programs, typically suppliers are regionally based. They're not next to where you're manufacturing, so it's just a communication nightmare when you have an event. So your supplier base, really, who are your critical suppliers? It's not the time to find that it's not the time to think about who your suppliers are and how do you get in touch with them when you're in a crisis, right? You want to have your supplier database very, very well locked down. Who are my suppliers? Where are they supplying from? Do I have alternates? Do I have reserve inventory anywhere? Where's my stocks? Do I have alternates qualified that are in the same region? Do they use the same starting material? So that in the telecommunications industry, you hear that, everybody goes to the same chip manufacturer. Everybody goes to the same. So you may have 2 suppliers, but they have the same starting material. So specialty chemicals, that's usually a problem too. So you may have 4 different manufacturers who are all using the same starting material. And you don't know that you're all using the same starting material. So that's also where business intelligence can help you recover faster. If you can be the first one to increase your orders or increase your loads, or you have a preferential contract, you can actually get your material flowing faster than your competitors. So you want to understand that.
A very good question. This notion of diamond-shaped supply chains and going back to the same supplier upstream. Depending on industries, that varies quite a bit. Sometimes it really bites us badly, like the automotive and the plant fire in Germany. Any sense of how prevalent these diamond-shaped common providers are in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, so in our business, I think in pharmaceuticals, it's pretty, let me just say, some companies, like, if you look at Pfizer, it's my old, they bought my old company, so I can talk about them. Right, they're into everything. They have so many plants all over the world. They make everything. They have 2 and 3 and 4 sites. Sanofi, a French company, when they don't want to downsize in France because of labor laws, so they don't outsource as much. So some companies that are big mammoths in my business tend to do that. Where you have, so the less intellectual property, typically the more competition there is. So as we get closer to base chemicals as starting materials, there tend to be multiple suppliers. Whereas if you start going into, now you start going into a little bit more of a specialty chemical. As you get into specialty chemicals, which are really starting your pharmaceuticals, you actually get less competition because there's typically like phosgene reaction. It's a process that's very expensive, very explosive, very, there's a lot of problems with it. So there's not a lot of people doing it. Also, some of the government regulations with China and India, you actually have import bans where you can't source from those. For some markets won't take materials that are sourced from them. So it's so it puts regulations in place, and it just tends to reduce your supplier base. So the more specialized the chemical, usually the less competition there is. But even things like lactose is something, and capsules. Anybody take soft gel capsules? There's like one company that had the patent on soft gel capsules up until last year. It's actually a company in Florida that we work with. It's a beautiful location. Some other things like, I remember when there was a fire and everybody, the word shin-itsu caused great sweat pains down people because one supplier of capsules for 80% of the pharmaceutical industry. So yeah, the Shin-Itsu fire, believe me, everybody was qualifying alternates after that because we were all fighting for the same supply of capsules. Now, if you had a product that could go into tablets, that's your opportunity, right? You convert your market to tablets. So those people who like Advil, not migraine, what is it, the should be microbial products, the migraine, the soft gel. Well, you can take the tablet, we could make billions of those. We can turn those around overnight. So what are we doing? Telemarketing, hey, we got a problem with soft gels. Get everybody on tablets, run a promotion on tablets, because we want to drive the demand to what we can make. And we want you to back off of this one. So the last thing you want is marketing to run a promotion when you're out of business, when you're in a crisis, right? And believe me, if you don't coordinate it, it will happen. Murphy's Law, it will happen.
So then the follow-up question is, general pattern from what I see, and this is perhaps not very well researched, but most pharmaceuticals, including yourself, are going down the path of customizable drugs targeted to smaller and smaller users, right? So the big blockbusters of, the Viagras of the world, the Tylenols of the world are not there anymore. Does that essentially mean that there's going to be more issues with single source providers upstream in the supply chain because we have specialty chemicals? Is that fair to say?
Well, so it depends on the specialty of the process, and not necessarily maybe. So as long as you have a platform approach, so you can make 4 specialty drugs with the same line, and therefore it allows you to actually have redundancy. But if you have, soft gel was a very patented, very proprietary, nobody was doing it, so, it was very hard to get any backup. So that was your least preferred, but some formulations you had to go there, so you didn't have a choice. So I think it really, in our case, the volumes are shrinking, but as long as it's the same platform, you can apply the same principle. So you can have 2 sites with a common platform, and you try and make sure that your equipment is mirror image as much as possible so that you can transfer back and forth.
What about biologics? Is there even a supply chain for that, or is that all done in-house?
There is an active supply chain because there has been a capacity shortage in that area because there's so much variability in those processes. Products that, I worked on one that was going to be a blockbuster. We built a big facility for it, and it failed in clinic. So now you have all this capacity, they outsource it, right? So there is a contract group, if you will. There are also consortiums for things that are very containment-based, so oncology products. Typically, you'll get manufacturers pool resources with a third party, which can have its own risk as well, right? Because then when the company fails, the whole business is failing, right? You have a global shortage that actually happened in the oncology market about 2-3 years ago. where FDA shut down a facility that was basically the predominant oncology manufacturer for a lot of the United States. So, yeah, I think for every business, if there's money to be made, there's somebody out there trying to do it. But as the volumes are shrinking, you are seeing some consolidation, but everybody's trying to get on the same platform. So whether it's the same cell bank in terms of biologics, trying to consolidate your cell platforms, so that you can have that risk, if you will. But now you're doing Monte Carlo simulations. If I have 3 products that are at the upside versus all 3 fail, and it's very complex. Luckily, I don't have to do that. I mentioned transportation and logistics too. I work with one supplier who had no problems at all during Hurricane Sandy. They had all their employees in, they were all ready to go, but they couldn't get any trucks to come and pick up their product. So all their product, they were running their factory and their warehouse just kept getting full. Finally, they had to shut down because they couldn't get anybody to come and take loads because the roads around them were all destroyed. We have plants in Puerto Rico, right? What happens when there's a hurricane? You can't get anybody to fly product in or out. So maybe you have to make arrangements to have a charter jet go down and pick up your product. So sometimes it's not even things that are in your control, but you have to be thinking about the entire supply chain. So including your storage and your transportation. During Hurricane Sandy, we actually had somebody suggest we get the local ice cream truck because it was cold. Can we use the ice cream truck to send material to another site? Right? I mean, hey, it's cold chain, it's not validated, but I can put a temp tail in it, right? I mean, people get really creative, and during simulations, that's when this creativity comes out, and it's great. And you're thinking, okay, well, maybe we're not going to use the ice cream truck, but maybe what we will do is contract for a cold reefer to come in. During hurricane season, we'll keep a cold reefer on order or on site. So think about those kind of things. But creativity is great, and we do a lot with cold chain. And I mentioned again these visualization tools. So there's a lot of companies. I get like 5 or 6 phone calls a day from people trying to sell us model. We have some homegrown. We use a lot of Excel. So if you're an Excel whiz, that's great. If you're not an Excel whiz, you should be. So we do a lot with Excel. There are all these programs now that are coming out with visualization tools. So how do you map your supply chain and really visualize your supply chain? And it's really good what they can do because they can actually go to your suppliers and your suppliers and your suppliers. And then what you do is you get your tier 2, 3, and even 4 sometimes. And they'll show you where you have vulnerability. Your supply chain is very heavily concentrated in this part. And these are the geopolitical risks that exist in that area so that you understand that as part of your sourcing process. And then when an event occurs, you can literally call this up and say, okay, the tsunami is hitting in Japan. Here's what business I have. This is the plant, these are the suppliers, here's the parts, here's what my inventory is, and you're using like this integrated approach. So, in the past it used to take us days to just figure out where the problem was and what was impacted. Now you're talking about minutes. And again, in that time, you're already building your recovery plan. So the visualization tools that are out there are basically, again, helping you really take data and make it actionable. That's really what it's doing, because there's a supplier database, a quality database, and this database. So you have tons of data, and you can't make heads or tails of any of it. So what they're trying to do is link all this together and really make it easy for you to understand where's my business relative to my customer base, and how does that whole thing map. So these visualization tools, there's a lot of good stuff coming out in this space to make it easier to manage your supply chain. So a lot of what we just talked about is in this BIA template. Again, when the template itself, you probably could fill it out if you know the process, but I recommend typically doing it in a group setting. Is just bring a team together that's responsible for the process, because somebody's dumb, silly suggestion triggers a thought in somebody else's mind, and that's when you get that creative juice going and you really have the benefit of the BIA process. And the BIA process is really all about just brainstorming and really documenting the things that you don't always come naturally. Because you're trying to think, what if? Some people are really good at what if, some people are not. And the cross-pollination of the team is usually where you get the value. But before you start trying to fill out the template, you need to get your management buy-in. This business continuity is a labor-intensive process. It's typically, again, pulling people together. You need to make sure that people are aware of what you're trying to do and why it's important. Again, a resilient supply chain can absorb a shock. there's research out there. I've heard anywhere from 10% to 30%. So I think depending on your industry, it may vary. But you know, if you're in this business for a long term, after a disruption, you're going to lose business. Customers either, you know, in our business, if you have a product that's an acute drug, so somebody's sick, they go to the doctor, they get an antibiotic, they go home. If you're not there to supply that antibiotic, you lost the business. There are other products which are more long-term. So, you know, somebody's on it, they're taking a heart medicine every day, right? Maybe they skip one day, but they have to be on that medicine. So if they don't get their prescription today, they'll go a day or two without, but then they'll come back to you. So you have to understand your business. But in general, you will see a reduction in your sales and your shareholder. And the ones who have the ability to be resilient will typically grow share. And it's a pretty significant growth in some of the industries. So that's where you want to be. You want to be prepared. So one of the things I tell people is, again, try not to get too much into the weeds. So this is a typical risk curve. When you're looking at impact, probability of impact. Try and stay at a high level. If I lose my facility, whether it's because of a tropical storm or a hurricane or fire, I lost the facility. So just think of it in that way. So what do I need to recover the facility? If you get too much into the details, you get tied up and you're not going to, it's going to be too painful and it's not going to get you the business value you need. So again, stay at a high level. Okay. I mentioned before, we use a lot of the lean tools here. So if you really truly understand your process, and we do a lot of process maps at a very detailed level. So this process map, think about the company in a box at a very high level. What is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to take something, we're trying to make something. So we need suppliers, we need inputs into the process. If you map your process this way, this will help you with what we call a process flow or value stream, depending on how detailed you want to get with it. But think about all these systems and things. So in terms of your recovery. Again, what we do in our manufacturing area is understand the revenue that's at risk. So I have 3 different processing areas. 2 of them are redundant. I may not want to try and bring 2 of them up at the same time. Just get the one up and running. And there may be differences in process. So maybe I have one fully automated, may not be able to come up. The other one runs manual. I can get that up. I can get that up with maybe a couple more operators. So I want to understand my business model and the products that flow through there so I can really prioritize my restart. If you try and do everything, you'll fail. Focus your resources on a key area and then bring that up and then bring the next up and bring it. If you can get all 3 up, then great. But that's in typical crisis. You won't have enough labor to do that. So you have to really prioritize your labor.
How much consensus do we get? In fact, this is what we were just talking about before you were up. Is there generally good consensus with regards to all the folks that are going to be represented? Is finance and HR going to be concerned about things that perhaps engineering and quality are going to say you're crazy for thinking about that?
So typically, you're trying. Finance is going to be worried about the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're saying to finance is we're actually trying to help you in this process, because instead of having redundant operators for everything, we're only going to focus our energy and our redundancy in this area. So if we do this, we protect 80% of the business. If we do this, so you're actually trying to help finance and the other groups by saying, I'm going to give you a portion of workload. So I can't have redundancy for every position, but I can for this narrow area. And this is the business benefit of that extra spend. And as you said, typically it's very small. So, but again, you want to make sure that you use a data-driven process. Here's the way I explain this to my, and it's not a pretty drawing, but I think it's pretty basic, is understand your recovery. So I have to establish the site. If I lose a roof, I can't worry about operators. I need the roof repaired first, right? So get your site, get the integrity of your site. Once I have the site restored, now I need utilities. If I don't have water, I can't run production. And I need wastewater treatment as well. So I need an incoming water and I need an exit water. So if you establish these, then what will happen is you map this on a process timeline. Your recovery objectives will be different depending on the function. So in this case, my stockout, I have inventory that gives me a buffer. Some areas of the plant may not have to come up for days. There are other areas that have to come up right away. Because if I don't have power, I can't do anything. I may be able to run with a generator for so long, but then the full power has to come up. So if you understand your restart priorities, you'll give each department their recovery objective based on where they fit in the process. Now, recovery and return to normal, that's really decided at a different level than where that's usually that higher level business recovery team. So my job is to decide, okay, if I just let that plant go, this is the time. But if I can outsource this and bring a second source on, I may recover to normal a lot faster. But that's where that investment comes in. So if I invest up front and I have two sources, I may recover very fast. So how much investment you have and how quickly you recover really depends on how do you run your lines. Do you run at 75% capacity? Do you run at 50? If you have the ability to flex your capacity with labor, then you can recover faster. So if you're thinking about this in advance, during normal operations, if I just let things go normally, then it may take me months to recover. I had a supply disruption, and it took me 1.5 years to return to normal. People are tired of hearing about it, but I still had to manage it after 1.5 years because I didn't have the ability to flex my capacity to get back faster. Now, I was still meeting my goals, but I was running at risk. I wasn't at normal. Okay. So, data analysis is really important. And again, a lot of this, the analysis, this BIA results is going to feed your overall BCP, your recovery, and then you're going to do the testing. But when you do your data analysis, just again, focused areas. We talked a little bit, focus cross-training, focus redundancy. Do you have a touchdown space? So if your facility is not running, where do you tell people to go? During Hurricane Sandy, we had people operating out of a hotel, right? We said, go to this hotel. They have internet. We've got a conference room reserved. So if you can get out, go there. And then this way we know. And now you have a pool of people that you can have. So you usually want to have. Now, if the whole region is impacted, that may not work. So what do you have? Other regions. So we have management teams that are in 4 different regions. Well, when you think about Asia, we have America, we have Latin America, we have Europe. So there's always somebody that's connected and online. So how much of that work can you divert? So if a data center goes down in the U.S., it's unlikely that the data center in China is also going to be down, right? So you want to have that geographic diversity. Again, I think we've talked about this. It's cost avoidance, it's insurance. So in many cases, it's hard to quantify how much business you can recoup and what's the business opportunity. But you want to understand this from value engineering. You can overinvest in a certain thing. Start at the very high. If I have redundancy, then I may not want to put that much more investment in. If I don't have redundancy, maybe that's something I want to do. Do I have a single line or multiple lines? So, you start going down that curve and say how much investment. Because if you're a managing director of a facility, they're going to want to invest as much as they can in their plan. They don't want you ever to take work out. But what you want to do is try and understand through value engineering what's the right level of investment and what is the risk I'm covering with that investment. Okay. Communications, government regulations are very tricky. You could have a whole lecture just on government regulations. In most cases where there's a crisis, the primary resources and the priority is going to be devoted to the government, right? So they're going to make sure that the government has access to the roads, the government has access to the fuels, the government's going to get the first priority on everything. So if you're in an industry or you're in an area where you have to take that into consideration. There's also government regulations in terms of restarting. There's rules in Puerto Rico about how long you can run generators. So so if you have a rule, question, if you have a restriction like that, you have to understand it. And then can you make provisions during the disasters to go over those provisions? So understand your government framework. And again, control tower concept is something that everybody's talking about now, is how to make data very visible, very available so decisions can happen faster.
Do you guys use them? Or are you going in that path at all?
I think everybody's going in that path. There's just so much data, and everybody needs different data, so customize, we use tools like Spotfire. Basically, you can customize your own dashboards, so you're trying to basically make something very easy for people to understand. So as fast as possible, getting data turned into information so that you can make decisions. So yeah, there's a big push towards that. I listed this. This is also in your library here. But basically, there's a lot of things that when you do this, just make sure that you're thinking about the integrated process. Don't take anything in isolation. make sure you really understand, you can't always work on financial impact because you can have other reputational risk and other things that may come into play, but you also are making these trade-off decisions because everything is usually a constrained resource, whether it's in equipment or people or money. You always have those constraints, so trying to understand that. Risk assessment and business impact, again, they're different. A risk assessment tells me what's the highest likelihood of a failure, but a high failure doesn't necessarily mean it could have a high impact. So we use those tools for different reasons, and we use both to understand where are my risks, what's my highest risk, but also with business continuity, it's what's my impact. That's really what you want to know. So severity and impact is really important. And again, I guess we can go through the details of this. So I'm just summarizing here. Remember, it's a cyclical process. We do it annually. The business conditions may dictate that you do it more frequently or less frequently, but at least look at it once a year, have the discussion, what's changed. The benefit of this is really the employee engagement and the manager's engagement. It doesn't help to have one or two people working on this. You really need to educate everyone. Because if you train people and you have a broad reach, then during an actual event, it's not the first time they're thinking about it. They're already thinking, if this happened, I remember doing that training, I remember going through that business impact. I know where to find the files. That's another thing. If everything's stored on your hard drive, if your hard drive crashes, that's not a good thing. So having paper backups, having system recovery, we have our data centers having all the plans are stored in a central data file, but they're also stored locally. So you want to think about all the various scenarios that can occur. Okay? And understand the financial and operational. Again, what is the bread and butter of your business? That's what you're trying to protect. So try and really use that ABC classification to try and understand really what is it that I need to do, and then what's what else can come later. If it can occur in simultaneous, that's great, but typically that's not how it happens. Okay. So that's my presentation. Again, I have tons of other examples of things, but I think we're out of time.
Wonderful. So take a couple of questions, if there are. If they're not, I have ample questions. We can be here all night with my questions, but in the interest of time, anyone?
We have one
Well,
here.
I do. We know that for a typical business, they need a lot of visibility after tier 1, going backward in the supply chain. But I guess for you being a bigger player, is that typically easy to get that information accurately? Who's supplying suppliers, who's supplying them, going back to like raw materials?
Yeah, so I think in some cases where it's regulated, it is easier. So in my business, if it's a commodity chemical, I may not know anything about it, and I may actually have less leverage. I'll give you an example. I have one material that was used by the car industry, but it was also used in my business. So I couldn't get the supplier to even talk to me because my total annual spend was $500 for a $12 billion business. So I had no leverage, and I had no information, and all I did was tell the people, just keep buying material and throwing it out. Because we need to have an inventory and keep cycling the inventory, because it's such a cheap thing. Like, why worry about it? Just keep buying the stockpile and just recycle your stockpile. Because I couldn't get any attention. So it's not your spend, and it's not the volume. It's really, it has to do with how much business you're protecting. So in some cases, I have to file all my regulatory starting materials. I have to file my intermediates, and they have to define their whole process. And all that information is regulated. So the suppliers are inspected and audited, so they don't have a choice. Now, their suppliers may not be. And so that's where I have to work with them to go down to that next level. In general, in my business, some of their primary chemical suppliers have been beat up enough by the Procter & Gamble's and the others of the world, and even Cisco in some cases, if they're supplying something that also goes into electronics, then I have an easier time because the other industries have already gotten here. So, but if it's something unique to my industry, I may have to start with a very, very basic presentation like this to explain what we're trying to do. So it's all over.
One other question?
So you said that your industry is pretty regulated, and all these regulations with every product launch or with relaunches or with every batch coming out. Do you plan for recalls as well, potential recalls that would be there, since you work with suppliers?
Yeah.
manufacture the product, you know.
So I would say, when you say we plan for recalls, we have a process for recalls, but we plan to never have to use it. So we have what we call value engineering and design standards. So we do a lot to anticipate the failure points because we don't want to recall. So we over-engineer the process to avoid having to go to that step of recall. You can't always, I mean, especially with your suppliers, you may end up there, but it's not a spot we want to be. So we typically, a lot of testing, a lot of control points. We use real-time release in a few applications where we're trying to literally measure the process of the product as we go through every step so that we never, some of our products have something like 10,000 tests and controls because we never want to get to the point where we have a failure. But we do have a failure process, so if we do have a failure, we know whether, we have the genealogy trace, we can go all the way back.
Last question?
So I want to piggyback with that question before I ask my last question.
Sure.
So, although you don't plan for a recall, do you have contingencies in place? Like, because the company I work for just went through a recall 3 months ago, and we were just blindsided. We didn't know what to do, like who are the people, how to manage this, and we ended up going to a third party who was an expert and say, you know what, you manage this because we don't know how to do this. So, like, do you have rules of engagement in the event that this happens? These are the things we should do.
Yes, and my company is fairly large. We do business all over the world. So at any one point in time, you may have batch failures, and so you're just trying to anticipate that. But the biggest thing with recalls is having a good visibility of your supply chain. So from the point of failure to the point of sale, right? So you can have a recall that goes forward and backwards. You can have a supplier recall material, and you now need to figure out where you sent it. Or you could have a recall at the end and you need to go back all the way to the supplier and see where else it was used. So we do have our supply chain, we use SAP as our primary tool, but our SAP has those genealogy traces so that we can do that. We can go from start to finish in any market already. But that also requires a lot of data and a lot of data standards, so it's not something that comes naturally, you have to work on it. But our quality systems and our quality process actually have recall processes part of the FDA inspections and EMEA inspections. They review that. There is actually a new EMEA guidance that just published. I don't know if you got to this in class, but quality risk management is real big with the European Union, and they've just passed some regulations the end of March, which actually tell you that you have to be able to understand your quality risk of all your supplies and your materials, and that you have to be able to map your supply chain. So it's now a regulation. So if it wasn't already enforced, they've now regulated it. So as of March.
All right, so and you asked a question, sorry. In the interest of time, to move on, let me ask one other question that probably pertains to everyone here. Part of the reason these folks, which is the second batch, in supply chain risk and disruption, we had a full house with 35 students. I sense that at least the word on the street is that supply chain risk and the ability to analyze and respond to disruption has become more and more important. Can you allude to how, with regards to BMS perhaps, in terms of career, you've been in supply chain, so it's ideal. How do you see supply chain and risk management as enhancing one's career?
So again, as a pharmacist, I never thought I would be in supply chain, and I kind of rolled into it over time. Supply chain didn't even exist back then. But the supply chain and risk management, or supply chain is becoming the pillar. And if you look at some of the industry, they say that supply chain is actually going to become the chief reporting relationship that you asked about. The vision is that eventually that could be supply chain. Because we have the information, we have the visibility, we know the customers, we have the systems. So information is king. So if you can manage information and you can analyze and get to data fast, then you become the one that everybody wants to talk to. So when there's a supply disruption, supply chain is the pivotal player in that. And the issue is not just, they know what the sales are, it's just about how fast can you get back in business. And it really demands supply chain. Prioritize the products, get the transportation, get all the logistics in place so you can recover the business. So the more and more global disruptions there are, it's bringing more attention to this field, and so business continuity is popping up everywhere now, whereas before it was kind of like, don't worry about those things. So companies are investing in it, and actually, again, my department is new as of just won't even a year. But before we had supply chain risk was sort of buried in everybody's day job, and we're pulling that out now and saying that we really need to give this more attention. And it's everybody's business. It's sort of like safety and quality is everybody's business. Risk management is now everybody's business. But you become the experts. They're sort of like, you're the coach, you're the orchestra leader, whatever you want to call it, whatever analogy you'd like. Somebody needs to be able to manage the data and really bring everything together. Understanding the priorities is the most important. If you have the data and the ability to analyze, that's where you're going to win. So definitely a career there.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here, Denise. It's a pleasure, and you can tell I was excited to have Denise here as not only as a Rutgers alum, but one that is in supply chain and is in risk management, and she knows this stuff too. So thank you so much for being here.